Okay, we're going to return from our executive session and resume the work session for Wednesday, June 16th, 2021. We'll open that up with the Board of Education business. Superintendent John Spicer.
Good evening, President Ham, members of the board, and our esteemed guests. Who's driving tonight? Steve is driving tonight. Can we, I do have a presentation for the board this evening. It is a summary of our April meeting where we discussed a 6-8 building as the Epson loads. There we go. So I'd like to take an opportunity to recap a little bit of some of the items that we discussed then, but also go a little bit deeper into some of those items with you. The recommendation still is to build a new middle school for grades 6 through 8. Some of the main reasons for that is that there would be no need to redistrict and maintain our K-5 neighborhood schools. Currently, the enrollment at Boyd E. Smith and Seipelt, as well as Meadowview, are very high. The capacity at Boyd E. Smith and Charles L. Seipelt Elementaries, there is definitely no classroom space available. We're using every nook and cranny there. We're using a custodial closet, if you will, as a motor room for our students with disabilities. So there's definitely a need there. With that would come the abate and demolishing of Milford Junior High School. Once again, the junior high school, built in 1962, was built to house 618 9 through 12th grade students. Currently, our enrollment 7 through 8, 2 grade levels, is 1,008. The junior high school currently well over capacity. Every nook and cranny is being used for academic space and beyond. There would be a possible abate and demolish of Miami Elementary School should this bond issue be placed on the ballot and passed. The reason that I use the word possible is that our real estate agent for South, Nat Commissar, did state that possibly just abating it and leaving it as is could make it sell for a higher amount for the district. So we would have to see what the market bears at that time, should we get to that point, or when we get to that point. And that current Miami Elementary site is home of the Milford Preschool and the Success Academy. And lastly on this slide, the site safety and traffic flow at the junior high and high school campus would need to be reconfigured. I do have some specific dollar amounts that I'd like to discuss later on in the presentation about that and what that really means for us. But anybody that has spent any amount of time on the campus before school or after school, immediately before, immediately after, understands the volume of vehicles that are trying to come in and come out of that site. So there would be some site safety and traffic flow on the junior high school campus. Next slide, please.
General pedestrians, I mean, like among
yes.
all those cars, there are also like
There are, yes. Thank you for noting that. There are pedestrians on Wolfpen Pleasant Hill coming through the junior high and then potentially walking to the high school. It is a safety concern, absolutely. The lighting, et cetera. So it would be very beneficial for us to have that as well. So thank you for asking that.
John,
next,
John,
yes, ma'am.
Do you want questions now, or
Yeah,
would you rather?
actually, I had planted a, what questions have we generated on the third slide? But we can do it now. Let's do it now. If you have
Okay.
questions on that slide, let's do that.
Yeah, 2 questions. The first, if the bond is passed, if we run the bond this year and it's passed, will redistricting be needed in between now and the building being finished?
That's a great question. I don't believe so at this time. We do not believe that that would be the case. We believe right now at Boyd E. Smith. Boyd E. Smith was the one building that we were really concerned about this year. We had considered using the library classroom space that is 2 stories high, very loud, but talking with Mina Espy, the principal, Don Baker, interim principal as well, and the teachers in that grade level, we decided not to do that, and that they would have a higher class of students per classroom. They decided that themselves, and we're very grateful for that. But they felt like that would be better, and they didn't want someone to have to actually teach in a space that really wasn't designed for a classroom space. So we do not believe at this time, unless there is some crazy influx of students into the district, that we would do that. And I think a great point that I did not bring specific numbers with me this evening. I'm sure the team can dig them up for me. Open enrollment is not the issue. Open enrollment is not the issue. We have board policy that states how many students can come in based on the number of students per grade level, per classroom, and that ratio, we keep it. So I just want folks to know that open enrollment is not the issue at all with overcrowding in any of our buildings. Great question, thank you.
Good. Second question, or actually not a question, but can you just talk a little bit about where preschool and Success Academy will go?
Yes. So the preschool currently at the Miami Elementary site, we would take those students and we would put them into 2 of our buildings, possibly 3, but certainly 2 of our buildings. There's some space at Pattison. There's also some space potentially at McCormick and Mulberry. Yeah, those 3 buildings. So we would put that in there, those 3 spaces. So we would have both ends and something in the middle. And then Success Academy, yep. Success Academy would be a part of this new 6-8 building. We would hope to design that in a way that it would have its own entrance separate from the rest of the 6-8 students as well.
How many students currently are in Success Academy?
Currently, we're running anywhere from 50 to 75, hoping for about 100 or so into next year.
Because we're revamping that a little bit, right, to expand
We are.
its appeal and its.
Yes, so the academy, I think we're going to call it the academy, going into next year, will have its own IRN number from the state, so it's a standalone school. Rob Hatfield, the current associate principal there, will be the principal in that building, and we're looking to do some more potential online things and potentially a moneymaker for the district as well.
So what would the, just looking ahead, if you want to change this and expand it, what would be the potential? Do you want 250 in there?
I think that we would not want 250 physically in the space. It would still be the 100 or so, 125-ish physically inside, and then potentially be a source for others, like open enrollment, if you will, but they would not physically be in that space.
Okay, so you would.
Do you want to add anything to that, Paul? Paul's looking at me like I'm crazy. I'm good. Thank
So
you.
you'd physically build it for up to 125?
Yeah, I think we would keep the same amount of teachers that we have there. I think the thing that what's important for people to know is that the teachers that are currently at Success Academy, they teach our students. They're not doing Apex. They actually teach regular classes to our students, so we need the physical space for them to actually teach our students and be with them in their classrooms. So we would keep that the same number. We wouldn't necessarily add any additional staff there. Correct? Nope.
Thanks.
Have we generated any other questions on this slide? Very good. All right, going into our next slide, why a 6-8 middle school? We did touch base in April. The team, central office team, did discuss that with you in the community in April. I'm going to actually have them give a summary as well on these 4 bullet points of Ohio Learning Standards: equity with programs, academics, and social emotional learning.
The first bullet point is talking about the learning standards in Ohio, and in Ohio, the learning standards for each subject area define what all students should know and be able to do at the end of that grade band. And the grade bands are pre-K through 2, 3 through 5, 6 through 8, and 9 through 12. And they represent developmentally provides some really powerful benefits for those students for learning. The programs and the resources that we use to teach those standards, like in pre-K through 5, are different than our 6 through 8 programs and resources. And having 6th through 8th grade students and teachers together using the same programs and working toward the same standards allows us to differentiate for our children, allows increased opportunities to group children for intervention and for enrichment. It allows for us to share materials across the grades, which is a huge cost savings. And it provides for much more targeted professional development for the teachers in each of those subjects and with each of our programs.
One of the other pieces that a 6-8 middle school could provide for our students would be an opportunity at a more equitable experience. One of the disadvantages, I don't love that word, but while neighborhood schools are great and a K-6 building is awesome, that's 7 years in one place, which has a lot of benefits. But one of the things that's not beneficial is, as those children get older, some of those opportunities that those older kids could get to, they can't in an elementary setting. So if we can get them to the junior high, they could have access to band, choir, other programs. How we handle the cohort now, the math cohort, which is an advanced placement and movement in the math pathway, it would give us a chance to get them there, maybe get more students there and approach how we do that differently. That is a complete distance online model through Schoology now. It could be in person, face-to-face at a middle school setting. So there are so many things that are offered to our current high school students and junior high students that our 6th graders could have some access to and gain some experience in as they start that time frame. In addition to the grade bands that Jill had mentioned, it ties in perfectly with that as well, some of those opportunities academically and with extracurriculars.
So Rob, right now we do the math cohort, and I think there are lots more opportunities for us to offer advanced classes for 6th graders if they were easier to provide.
I
So
mean,
would we do that?
Access is always, whatever you have access to, proximity is the key to everything in life, you know? If there is some unique needs a child could have, you have a lot more options if you have 3 grade levels of resources and materials and staff and course offerings. So it certainly can open up the opportunities of some children getting access to academic things as well as, I mean, sometimes I think the non-academics could be more important. You think about clubs and stuff. Come junior high or middle school time is when students start really becoming interested in things or trying to discover what they're interested in. The sooner you can do that, the greater opportunity there is for them to kind of find something that they love, like if they find out that they're a music kid or a band kid, or just Magic the Gathering after school. If that's important to them, that's an opportunity to connect and do some things. So yes, it can provide all that. And athletics, while athletics may not specifically be an option for 6th graders because we don't determine that, having access to see it and to be in the environment of it and to participate even as an audience member of it is certainly something that would benefit them as a student and benefit the other students who are participating in those things. So.
I'm back. I just wanted to add an answer to your question that one of our challenges for some of our students who are identified as gifted, if their parents choose to accelerate them in a subject or by grade level, it's challenging for them and as a decision to move them as a 6th grader to the junior high to take 7th grade, like a 7th grade class in ELA or in math, then have to come back to the elementary. It's challenging for travel, but it's also, as a parent, a difficult decision to send your 6th grader to the junior high for part of the day. So some of our parents opt not to do that when their child really could benefit, and some of them opt to stop it, their subject acceleration in 5th or 6th grade, knowing that that's coming. So that would also really help that transition.
Yeah.
So when we talk about academics, I think it's important to note that our staff at the junior high has done an amazing job recreating space, but it's become limiting to when we think about our portrait of an eagle and we talk about collaboration and the spaces and the size of those rooms, and how sometimes they are not flexible in order to complete the tasks of the courses. So we think about our robotics. We think about the spaces we use for robotics, our exploratory courses. We think about the band and choir room, talk about the size of the cafeteria, how we can really not, we can't fit a whole class in there, forcing us to have multiple lunches or utilize parts of we're still going to utilize half of the gymnasium next year. That's not social distancing, that's just pure size and volume of students. It's just important. We're converting spaces that weren't meant to be classrooms. We have art rooms without running water. We've converted an old home ec room into a space for a teacher to teach Eagle 101. So, and we're trying to have a STEM designation at the junior high. And one of the challenges is the space and the inability for it to be flexible to offer those exploratory courses. So when we talk about academics, first we have to celebrate that our staff is being very creative with the help of the teachers, the admin, facilities, really trying to squeeze every ounce of the space out of that building, not to hurt the educational opportunities for kids, but also looking long-term. If we really want to dig in and accomplish those competencies in the Portrait of an Eagle, that are 21st, 22nd century skills, we have to have a space for them that's flexible and adaptable. So that's our challenge. We want to have exploratory courses, we want to be on the cutting edge, but we're trying to make that happen in a building that's not suited for it.
And then lastly, to wrap up, the importance of the 6-8 band is around the social emotional aspect. And as we know that the middle grade time is one of the most important for social emotional development. As these young adults look to acquire the knowledge and attitudes and skills to recognize and manage their emotions as well as make connections, it's very hard to do in a 2-year turnaround period. So it has been kind of a transitional period as they acclimate from 6th to 7th, and then they have to reacclimate from 8th to 9th quickly. So having 3 years and the ability to loop with the same assistant principal and the same guidance counselor and essentially just that same family feel within their team allows them to explore and actually find themselves and regulate themselves and prepare. So that's the social emotional aspect, and we certainly know that's an increasing need that's critical in all skills and really the foundation before academics even. So I think that finishes up this slide.
It does. Questions?
Yeah, one question, which I hadn't thought of before this. So the 6th graders would now have their own guidance counselor, is that right?
Correct, that is.
So that would be something new that would help them. Can you talk a little bit about that and the benefits of starting that a year earlier?
Sure. I think that just with the 6th grade band being a part of 6-8, we're always looking at this as a transition year for students to begin to see what their pathway after high school will be, whether that be college, career, the military, et cetera. So as Paul had referenced, there is the option for more exploratory classes. There is a school counselor then with that group who can begin to see their interest, gain information through surveys, and really help create that path for that student, or at least to explore different paths that a student may be interested in or have skill sets around. So 1 year is really incredible when they think about it, because those exploratory classes do not exist currently within those K-6 buildings. So we always say we have lots of opportunities. The Oaks are getting involved already at the junior high, but that's an opportunity for many students who may not have more of the college traditional pathway. So it's just the opportunity, and they're at the age that they can start making those decisions on their own as well, and then have that supportive team of their assistant principal and school counselor with them.
Thanks.
So I think, to be fully transparent with everyone, if this bond issue is put on the ballot and it's passed, there would be an additional staff of a school counselor and an assistant principal. That would have to happen. We can't just, that would have to happen. So to be transparent, that would be 2 full-time employees that would need to be hired, additional than what we currently have.
So it would be an assistant principal and a counselor specifically dedicated to the 6th graders?
Yes.
And then perhaps they would both loop through? in
Yes,
that-
like we would probably keep the same system we have now, where they loop through with the kids for 3 years and we get to
Okay.
know them. Yep. Thanks. Thank you, team. Next slide. Yes. What are the benefits of building a
quick,
new
John.
6-8 middle school? Yes, Mr. Ham.
Sorry, just real quick.
Sorry.
So we talked about some additional costs, but there's also some efficiencies that could potentially reduce costs with having a 6th through 8 middle school. Can we go through a few of those or talk about what some of those may look like?
Well, certainly, I think some of the efficiencies that Paul alluded to is with staffing as well. But you could look at, like currently we have our band and choir folks that are at the junior high and high school. They're traveling and they've got these mixed up days, and so I think there's some efficiencies there. Staffing, when you have all of them together versus if you have that 6th grade together, there would be some efficiencies in staffing versus having 6 different elementaries with teaming. So when you bring those numbers together, the scale of, what's your phrase, Paul, that you like to use? The scale of economy, I think it is. Economy of scale that Paul likes to use with the high school and junior high. So you get that scale as well. It does make some sense. And there are some savings. There definitely will be some savings there that will offset the need for those 2 full-time employees.
Okay, thanks.
I know it's impossible to figure it out right now, but likely if we had to redistrict, there would be additional cost in transportation because you'd now be taking kids most likely farther.
Farther
So-
away, likely, yes.
And that adds up really, really fast. So we
Transportation
probably
adds up
could-
fast, yes.
Yeah, it's amazing.
Can I just add, there's a huge cost savings in professional development if you have
Yes.
grades together. And then I just received our new materials for social studies for next year and science. And if they, all 6th grade were in one building, you wouldn't have to have a set for every building of everything. They can share a lot of materials. It's a huge cost savings because resources are pretty expensive.
Great, thank you. Yeah, and that was my point, was just that although we will incur some additional costs, there's also some significant financial efficiencies to be gained by the 6th through 8 middle school that could not only offset, but potentially even create further savings.
Yes.
And keep in mind, in this plan, we're shuttering a whole building. So even though we're building the new middle school would be bigger than the current junior high, between the efficiencies and the fact that we're shuttering that building, at least for my custodial staff, I don't need to increase my custodial staff because I'll move the 2 people that are the preschool to the junior high. So some of that will add to those cost savings.
Great,
Thank you.
Ms.
Jenny, do you
Buckley?
have more to add?
Well, the other piece would be, we currently have an administrator at the preschool, and depending on the nature of the preschool, some could be absorbed, but potentially an administrator could be, well, not say absorbed, but moved from that role. It could be considered, so there could be some sort of a wash there.
Okay, we'll go on to the benefits. As my good friend Jeff Johnson would say, we don't want to get too far into the weeds on this in design. There would be certainly an opportunity, should the bond issue be placed and passed, for all stakeholders to be a part of the design process, but there are some design elements. Paul covered them greatly already about the flexible, practical, and sustainable learning spaces at the junior high, how it's inadequate at this time, and students, the inability to do some of the learning, the extensions, et cetera. Certainly the technology, we mentioned the gym, our fine arts, and then certainly the Success Academy. We would want the Success Academy to be a part of this new design. And then the overall health and wellness of our staff and students being in a very crowded environment right now with small classroom spaces, et cetera, and in spaces that are not designed to be classrooms. The safety, unfortunately, we do have to talk about safety sometime. Sometimes, proper vestibules for our families to enter so that, folks are safe. Our classroom access would be from the inside only. You think about that current junior high school, and there's windows everywhere. And they're the old windows that just kind of crank and they open out. So we think that's important. And certainly our technology infrastructure and our ability to have cameras in the building would be greatly increased. And then certainly the efficiencies of an HVAC system, the lighting, and then of course the efficiency of traffic flow. Again, the traffic flow is horrendous currently on our campus. Any questions on that slide?
Just a comment, kind of.
Sure.
So some people say buildings don't teach kids. And in the past, perhaps that was true. But I think, you know, in talking about the flexible spaces and what we can do with that, I think it's really important for people to understand that with the way we do need to teach students today, with the needs, with the, you know, the teamwork that needs to be included, embedded, you know, just the entire approach, we really need to have these flexible spaces. So it's no longer true that, you know, these buildings with classrooms for 25 kids are going to meet needs.
That's correct. The very last slide that I have, I do mention the fact that we need these spaces. We need this building for our students to be innovative and to compete in a world economy. And you had mentioned you know, collaboration, team building, you know, which are some of the #1 skills that business people are looking for in our graduates as they go on. So it is certainly an opportunity. I'll come back to that as well. Next slide, please. So the next 2 slides will be a timeline and steps required for you as the Board of Education to place the bond issue on the November 2nd, 2021 ballot. These items are strictly procedural in nature, and there is no commitment by the board until an August filing deadline, in which we would physically go to Batavia to file. And so if you will, left to right, the second bullet, of course, is our work session today. Tomorrow, I'm going to ask Mr. Rabe to give you a brief on those real quick, but tomorrow there will be 4 resolutions on the board agenda for you, and those 4 resolutions, Mr. Rabe?
You got it. So the first resolution is going to be the most important one. That's the where you're asking for ballot consent from the High Department of Taxation as well as the High Department of Ed. What this is because of our overall property values within the district and our current debt limit that we have is with the current outstanding bonds, we have to ask for special permission from the state to move forward with it. If you remember last time, we went through the same process and the state said, hey, you could go up to 78 million. Currently, I believe the number is more along the line of 106 that we could go up to. Obviously, we're nowhere near that number, so I don't think that's going to be an issue. However, in this resolution that will be presented tomorrow, there is a do not exceed number. So whatever number that is currently in there, currently it's the 55 million that we've kind of talked about. That's the highest number that you could possibly go as long as you pass that resolution at that limit. The other 3 resolutions, basically you're just appointing various companies. So the first one would be that you would appoint Densmore and Scholl to act as bond counsel with the bond issue. You would appoint RBC Capital work as the underwriter, and you would appoint Payne and Associates to work as the municipal advisor. So you're just basically hiring people as we move along this process. But the first one would be that bond consent one.
Did you say that tomorrow we have to say what our max will be?
With the maxes that you would go for. Obviously,
Okay.
It's not set in stone of what you're going for. It's just, this is the max you're willing to ask for.
Okay, so if we say 55 million tomorrow, and we decide in 2 weeks that we need 56 million, too bad.
Too bad, you're out of luck.
Okay.
Yeah, unfortunately.
And just to clarify, we were 98 million was our max last time, not 78.
Yeah, not 78.
Oh, I'm sorry, I got them flipped. Yes. So yeah, we don't believe you'll have any issues getting approval from the state to move forward with it.
Thank you, Mr. Rabe. June 24th, we will have another Facebook Live event. We'll do that here at the board office. We'll have that at noon. We'll go noon to 1. There is a current thought exchange out there. There is a slide at the very end that also has some links on it as well. More information about that. On July 8th, OFCC meets to consider approving the NOCA that was signed and sent to them. Next slide, please. And then July 8th or 9th, we'll have to have a special board meeting to pass another resolution. The Milford Board of Education will likely, we'll make this decision tomorrow. It's on the agenda for tomorrow for you to decide what the day and time is for that. And on this resolution, Mr. Abe, correct me if I'm wrong, you will determine the exact amount and length of the bond issue to be sent to the county auditor for certification to then be sent to the state.
Correct.
Thank you, sir. On July 15th will be our regularly scheduled meeting. You'll approve the bond issue amount, the length, and the actual ballot language. Anything else to add to that, Mr. Abe?
Yeah, the resolution that you'll pass on the 15th, this will be the actual ballot language that eventually down the line we'll file with the Board of Elections. Obviously dependent upon OFCC's board meeting that's later on that month.
The week of July 26th is when we expect to hear from OFCC if we have been approved. And then the week of July 26th through August 4th is when Mr. Rabe, myself, or someone will physically make our way to the Claremont County Board of Elections to file a bond issue if that's what's decided. And that is our official, we're all in. That's the first time that anything that you're doing is not procedural, it's an actual physical, we're putting it on, and we'll physically take it there.
Other than, as a board, our decision point will be July 15th. That's when we'll vote on the conditional approval, should that come in, if we want to put something on the ballot in November.
Because I was under the assumption that, or under the understanding, not the assumption, that we actually had to meet as a board that first week of August in a special session to
That's what I thought.
approve that. I don't see that on the timeline here.
Yeah.
I'm sure that just,
Yep.
After having a further discussion with bond counsel, that resolution that we were hoping to pass after the 26th actually has to be filed with the state on the 27th. So that's why instead of trying to squeeze in another special board meeting, we just added it to the regular board meeting on the 15th.
Okay, so
So
that's
that
where-
saves you guys from having to call another special one.
that's where that meeting went. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank
So
you.
that, when you pass that on the 15th, then what we do is that has to be filed with the state by the July 27th.
But that does not commit us to the bond
Yeah,
yet.
we would not, you're committed to the bond when we file with the Board of Elections. So
Okay.
if on the 26th, when OFCC meets and they deny you, we could come back, call a special board meeting, rescind it, and it's off the table. So that's why we wouldn't file it until after we know from OFCC which way they voted.
And let's be clear, we're getting the information confirmation that we will get approved on the 26th of July, and we have a filing deadline on the 27th of July.
Yeah, that's why we wanted to push that resolution up a little bit. to
Who
get it
puts that
on time.
together?
You might,
That's the.
you
that's
might get an
the one-
answer on the 26th.
Yeah.
It could
One's
be the
state's-
27th.
Yeah, one's the state schedule and one is OFCC schedule.
8-4 is the drop dead file with the county.
Yes. Yeah, so I know that time frame is, one day, right.
That's right.
Mhm.
So let me just confirm. We pass it on the 15th. You file it with the state,
Correct.
which does not commit us.
Does not commit you.
The deadline for that is the 27th. So if we don't hear from OFCC on the 26th or 27th, that's
Right.
okay,
Right,
as long as we hear from OFCC by the 3rd.
right. Nothing will go on the ballot until we hand that over to the Board of Elections. So until we hear from OFCC, we will not file it with the Board of Elections. So that's the key. We're waiting to hear from OFCC.
And the 27th is not the Board of Elections. August 4th is the Board of
August 4th
Elections.
is the Board of Elections.
Okay.
Right. But yeah, you would think they would try to work out their timelines, and no.
Okay.
And Election Day is November 2nd, the final stopping point. Next slide, please. All right, partnering with OFCC, what does this mean? So if co-funding is approved by OFCC in July, we have 13 months to pass a bond issue to use the funds. So that means we have November of '21 and or May of '22 in order to pass a bond issue and secure those funds. The formula for co-funding a project developed through OFCC was developed for us during 2000 while we created the master plan. 73% is our local share and 27% is the state share. That has not changed in 20 years, and it will not change. So another important factor is that OFCC figures their cost per square foot at $274.40 per square foot. And then also, this is a partnership in every aspect with them, and everything is bid. Everything a part of this project will be bid out. So I think that's important for us to know. And OFCC does have a say along the way with us. So it is a true partnership. Next slide.
John, that
Yes.
274, that's higher than it has
It
been?
is higher. Jeff can explain exactly how they came up with the 274.40. We believe it's
Are you sure he could explain that?
Well, I don't know if he can. He can try to explain what their formula is, but the 274.40 is an increase, and it does, but it's ultra conservative as well.
OFCC updates their cost sets every year. As Mr. Spicer just mentioned, I do still think that they are conservative numbers. We remember back when we built Boyd and Sitebelt, we were working off of OFCC square foot numbers, and we had some challenges. It wasn't just the size of the building; it was also, getting a good building for that number. That being said, the last year or so, we have seen some increases in OFCC's cost sets that are a little bit more than we've seen in the past. The crazy thing right now is because of COVID, construction prices, just like a lot of other things, are all over the map. I've talked to people within the industry, and they're hoping that going into this fall and into early 2022 that things start to kind of settle out a little bit. Where they'll settle out is, I don't want to say anybody's guess, but obviously is to a certain extent a guess. So in some ways I feel a little bit better about it than I have in the past, but I still believe that they're conservative numbers, and we're going to have to be really careful during our design process to make sure that a building is designed, to meet that 274.40 a square foot. So that's kind of where we're at now. The upside is that, the bond passes in November. This job won't be bid out for a good year and a half after that, maybe even close to 2 years, because that's the design process that it takes to put that bid package together until those things hit the street. So we will be well beyond the COVID craziness of the construction industry by the time that we'll actually be bidding that job out.
So a couple questions for you about all that. First of all, just to make it really clear to everybody, when you say conservative, that means on the low end, not
That is
building
correct.
in a lot of extra.
That is correct.
Okay. So this is OFCC's number for 2021. We're not going to bid this until 2023, say. But we will still be using OFC's number from today.
That is correct.
Okay. So in the meantime.
Theoretically, and I can't guarantee this, but theoretically, every project that OFCC does is the same process we're going through. You come to your agreement, you've got your master plan, it's the cost set at the time that master plan is agreed to. You got to pass a bond issue, you got to go through a design cycle. It's a 1 to 2 year process to get to when you're bidding it out. Theoretically, they built in the escalation of that time to get to actually bidding out that project.
Okay.
Theoretically.
Yeah.
I can't stand up here and defend OFCC's numbers. I didn't have anything to do with coming up with them. They are what they are. We're in a partnership with OFCC. And I don't say we're stuck with those numbers, but the numbers are what the numbers are. And like I said, we're going to have to make sure we design a project that meets those numbers. And during that design process, it's really kind of a three-step process, and at the end of each step, before you get to the bid phase, you know, you go through the first step, there's an estimate put on what you've done. You go to the second step, there's an estimate put on what you've done. If that estimate comes in higher than what your budget is, you go back and you start redesigning, and you work to get that number back down.
Yeah, which is what we did with Boyd and Sipel.
Correct.
And then we needed a little bit of local money, and that is still an option at the time.
Correct.
Which isn't ideal, obviously. And as you know, my concern is just that we end up in a situation similar to Boyd and Sipel, where we probably would have done a few things differently if we had had more money. If we had gone in expecting, yeah, you know, we need to spend whatever, $4 million instead of $2 million. So I guess that's still my concern with the OFCC numbers.
Understand, I don't necessarily disagree with you.
Yeah.
It's a challenge, and you know, again, we want to get every dollar that we can and get the best building we can for what that budget is, and it's a challenging process to go through to get that. You know, we're not building a Walmart. It's not a box, you know, with a couple of walls in it. That's not what a 21st century school looks like today. You know, so it is a challenge to build to that number, but you know, just like at OFCC's enrollment projections, they are conservative. They're not going to overbuild. We're not going to overbuild. Do I think we can, you know, the reality is Boyd and Sipel, if they were a little bit bigger, they're fantastic schools. They're very energy efficient. It's a nice compact design. You know, I personally think the design of those buildings is fantastic. They're a little bit too small.
Well, there's certainly less roofing costs on those two buildings than the other four.
Well, and that's part of the compactness. I spent some time with an architect today and walking through some of our buildings. You know, and we really talked about the compactness we went through Sipel. You know, when you build a second story, you know, when you go into our 4-pack, you know, now granted they're 20,000 square feet bigger than Boyd and Sipel, but they're really spread out. I mean, it's a haul to get from one end of one of those buildings to the other. They really are spread out, and you go into Boyd and Sipel, and it's like you feel like you take 10 steps and you've crossed the whole building, which is, I think, you know, from our curriculum people, I think there's a lot of advantages to that. You see a lot more kids, and it's easy to get around, and from a building efficiency standpoint, it helps quite a bit with the efficiency of not only the construction, but the operation of that building. And certainly building a new middle school, we would be looking to do something similar to that.
I love Boyd and Sipel. I think they're great schools and great design, and the quality is good. But like you said, it's just a little too small, and we would have made a couple of different decisions, so.
Right. Well, and we are still somewhat limited with the amount of space we have on that campus. So the idea of building a smaller footprint for the same number of square feet is important to conserve space.
Well, and I think, you know, without a doubt, we would build a 2-story structure, you know, in the classroom area. Theoretically, with the size of the building, we're looking at, you know, 3 stories wouldn't be unheard of. I don't know that makes sense. You know, that's something we would go through during that design process, which would obviously, you know, even more shrink the footprint of that building if we went to 3 stories, and not obviously in the entire building. You know, so I don't know. My gut tells me that 2 stories make sense, you know, but you could even go 3 theoretically. But again, that goes to the efficiency of that building.
And for those that, Jeff, that don't understand why they can't see how we could possibly make a decision on something that's not visible, can you walk through a little bit of that process and why we don't have pictures of what it looks like or what the design is today?
Well, every school's different. Every school in the state of Ohio is different. You know, obviously we've got 2 designs in our 2 elementary schools, but they were designed together. There's a pretty significant in-depth process that goes through to design a school building. A building this size, the contract with our architectural firm is going to be in the millions of dollars. You know, do you spend millions of dollars to designing something that you don't know that you're going to be able to build? The other part of it with being in a partnership with OFCC is even if the board did do that and we went out and hired an architect and designed this building before we passed the bond issue, OFCC wouldn't let us use that because as Mr. Spicer mentioned, they're a partner in this process. They sit at the table to select who the architectural firm would be. They've got a say in who that is. You know, we come in, we get proposals, those firms come in and give us presentations, and then there's a rubric that the district will have people at the table, OFCC will have people at the table, and we'll score those presentations, we'll score those proposals, and whichever firm, you know, ends up being scored the highest amongst that whole group would be selected to be that architectural firm. So they have a say in who that architectural firm would be. So that's part of that process, and then once that firm is selected, then obviously that design process starts. And then their job is to design the building that meets the budget we have. And again, during that design process, there are several steps where estimates are done on that design to make sure that we don't get to the end of the design process and we say we want a $50 million building and we've designed a $75 million building.
And we'll also, if we decide to go down this path and this does go on the ballot, it does pass, there'll be opportunities for public input on what's important to them, what's important to parents, teachers, students, community in terms of design elements. There'll be a process where that input will be brought in and be a part of the final picture.
You know, one of the things, like when we designed, you know, the high school adjacent to the ninth grade community, when it was designed, I wasn't employed yet with the district, but I was when we went through the design process with Boyd and Seipo. And we met with a lot of different groups, and the architects came out. I was in every one of those meetings, and you know, we literally looked at our staff with all the stakeholders and said, tell us what you want. Give us your wish list. Now, keep in mind that everybody's not going to get everything they want. We can't afford to do that. Not to mention that, you know, some of those wish lists might be in conflict with others, but at the end of the day, we can't necessarily afford to give everybody what they want. But it was, tell us what you want. Then we go back through and we evaluate, we prioritize what makes sense, what can we do, what can we afford. We put those things in the design, and then we updated people through that process of this is what it's looking like. I know you asked for this, but we can't really do that, but we're going to do this instead, and kind of talk through different ways to try to maximize what we could provide people based on what they asked.
Thanks, Jeff.
Thank you, Jeff. As we stated, the square footage rate is locked in at $274.40 per square foot. Currently, the project budget would be a proposal of $44 million, $44 million, and then OFC's co-funding portion of that would be $11.5 million. I'm rounding numbers here. And so what is important to note is that OFCC will co-fund grades 7 and 8 only. The 7th and 8th grade would be approximately 154,000 square feet. And note that it does include approximately $454,000 for a site safety allowance and also some radio coverage for first responders, should there be a radio coverage issue inside those buildings. So it's important to note that the 6th grade requires an additional 62,000 square feet. I think it's important to note that we just didn't pull this magical number of 62,000 square feet. You know, if you take the number above 7th and 8th grade at 154, you're looking at, you know, roughly 77,000 square feet, excuse me. And if you take away some of those common areas, gym, cafe, band areas, music, etc., you know, on a national average, you're looking at anywhere from 144 to 198 square feet per student. And So that's in the range of 72,000 to 99,000 total square footage for the amount of students. So it's about 500 students. So that's sort of how we kind of came up with that number. The other thing that I think is important for folks to know is you can see up on the graphic there, the red oval. Above that, there is a comment about a credit. And that credit of $1.3 million is from an ELP project, which would be the 4 classrooms, the addition to the junior high school. Yes, Mr. Miranda, it is super small. Even with my glasses on, I can barely read it. So what does that mean? Well, that means that those 4 classrooms, OFCC requires that those classrooms be either attached to a building that has 350 or more students in it. We will not be using those 4 classrooms. You know, the tail is not going to wag the dog, if you will. So, you know, the last couple of years, the concept of moving the junior high school from its current location on the property and moving it back would not allow us to use that. And then the idea that, well, we could use those 4 classrooms, again, we would still lose, even if we kept those 4 classrooms, we would still have this credit taken away of $1.3 million because there would not be 350 students in that building. Then you're also talking about the inefficiencies. You would have to run your utilities to it. You'd have to have new HVAC systems, et cetera. So the net loss on that, this is very difficult to explain, would be about $360,000 is really about what we would lose because of that. So I'll try to explain that to you. It may take a few times and it may take some one-on-one. And we're open to do that. So again, the proposed segmented cost is $44.1 million. The ELP credit is about 1.3. And so how the state determines is they take the 1.3 million away from the 44 million. That's where they take the 27% and the 73%, and that's how they come up with a number of 42.8 million. Okay, but the proposed segmented cost still remains the same. It's still 44 million. It's just the percentage is calculated once on the number that we get after we take the 1.3 away. So again, to be transparent, it is not our intention. The recommendation is, and the intent is not to use those 4 classrooms.
So, yeah, just to be sure it's clear, the 359,000 is 27% of the 1.3 million.
Yes. Jeff. Oh, he's ready for questions.
I was waiting. There's got to be questions, because I had questions. We actually had to call OFCC and make sure we understood what this math looked like, and I think Mr. Spicer did a really good job of explaining it. So it's not as though we're literally a credit of 1.3 million. They take the 1.3 off. That's where they do the calculation of the 2773. Obviously, the full project, the co-funded amount is still the 44 million, which you see in the NOCA. So it gets deducted, the percentage is determined, then it gets put back in because that's actually the cost of the project. And then the LFI amount would be the amount for the additional square footage to put the 6th graders in the building.
It doesn't look like the net changes by doing anything. We still get the same amount of co-funding.
The only thing that this ELP credit does is it reduces the amount of the state share, which then obviously increases the amount of the local share, but the overall project costs stay the same. The overall co-funded project cost is 44.1 whatever million dollars.
So when we've looked at 11 million, the 359,000 has already been accounted for.
That is correct.
It's
yes.
just that in this portion of the NOCA, they have spelled it out very clearly.
I don't know, I agree
Well,
that it's very
okay,
clearly,
no,
but yes,
you're
it's
right,
been
you're right,
spelled
you're
out.
right. They've
It has
spelled
been
it out
spelled out
in a very
and,
confusing way.
You know, I mean, that NOCA was 70-some pages, and, you know, it looks one way on this page, and it looks a different way on this page, and a different way on a different. So it can be confusing to go through, and that's why we wanted to try to explain it and be as transparent as we can about what that ELP credit is, how it was calculated, because it is kind of, it's confusing. Dealing with the state can be confusing.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, we've got 11.559 million coming from the state for this project. Anything above that, no matter what, whether it's part of the 7-8 or 6-8, is on us locally.
That is correct.
And
is
that
correct.
doesn't change with this scenario.
That is correct.
And that credit or that 359,000, we're not paying that back to anybody.
No, that's correct.
Okay.
And back in, was it 2011, 2012, when we made the decision to build those 4 classrooms, the intent was to use those in the future with the new junior high, because the thinking at the time was we would build the building right there. But that really doesn't make sense. And, you know, after a decade, we did spend the 1.3 million. We did intend to continue to use those classrooms, but, I mean, as John said, that would definitely be the tail wagging the dog, and it would actually end up being more expensive for us in the long run, wouldn't it, if we tried to keep them and build the building around it?
Without putting a design together, it's hard to say, but, you know, based on my experience and the thoughts of what that would take, I think we could easily spend more than $360,000 trying to quote-unquote save those classrooms. I don't think there's any doubt that would be a possibility. You know, it was 2009/10, I think, when we made the decision to build those 4 classrooms. And yes, at the time, we were still thinking it was a 7-8 junior high that we would build at some point in time. And yes, we did think that we would basically build that in the parking lot behind the junior high, and we would attach and use those 4 classrooms. You know, things changed over a decade. You know, but the other thing to keep in mind, we've talked about the overcrowding of the junior high. I'm not quite sure what we would have done for the last 10 years if we didn't have those 4 classrooms. So, you know, it's not as though we didn't get use out of them. You know, the reality is we probably would, if we had not built those 4 classrooms, we probably would have been forced to bring in some modulars, some additional modulars, you know, and over the course of 10 years, we would have easily spent $360,000, you know, to temporarily house students that we needed that space in over the last 10 years.
Well, I don't think that any decision we make regarding putting this on the ballot for November, a decision regarding that 4 classroom segment in the junior high doesn't have to be decided on today. We can look to potentially utilize that space in the future if it makes sense, but that'll require a cost-benefit analysis. If it doesn't make sense, then we won't.
Well, keep in mind that, as Mr. Spicer described, the only way that we don't get hit with that credit is if those 4 classrooms are attached to the new middle school. You know, if we wanted to try to reuse those 4 classrooms, regardless of the cost of having to run, because the utilities to those 4 classrooms run through the existing junior high, which is obviously going to be demolished. We would have to redo that. We would have to put in a new entryway, you know, all those kind of things. But the cost of doing that aside, if it's not attached to the new middle school, it would not be a school for 350 or more students. You know, we've talked about, you know, do we somehow utilize that to create the Success Academy up there? It's been an idea. Excuse me. But that's not a school for 350 students. So you would incur the costs of modifying those 4 classrooms to become a standalone building, and you would still get hit with this credit because it's not a school for 350 or more students. And that's a law that OFCC has tried twice to get some type of a waiver in order for us to do something, and it's been denied twice. So
I don't remember ever hearing that before, the 350 students. Yeah, I'm not saying.
I don't know if it just didn't come up, or, you know, as we've talked through a couple of different times, and it was reiterated when John and I had a conversation with Joe McNeil from OFCC this afternoon. So.
Any other questions on this slide? Just a couple more to go.
So, I'm sorry.
That's okay.
site safety is not the
Circulation.
circulation. Thank you. It is or it is not?
Can you go to the next slide, actually?
Okay.
So we have new grades 7 through 8, costs of $42.9 million. We have a demo of Miami, demo of the junior high school, with a subtotal of the 44,144. The site safety and traffic flow is, we're approximating $6 million. Again, not grabbing numbers from the air. We do have 2 independent contractors. JS Held has cost estimates at $7.3 million. And then we have another one for about $5 million. And then having a conversation today with another architect, their best estimate at this time would be about $6 million. So that's in addition there.
Those original cost estimates were 2 years ago, or a year and a half
That's
ago.
correct, yes. So one was $7 million 2 years ago, and one was $5 million 2 years ago. And so we believe it to be in the middle. And that is also based on a conversation with an architect today.
Yeah, we've worked with Kleiningers, who's done a lot of our civil engineering in the district. There were some estimates from them. They're familiar with our campus. The 2 biggest factors, or really the biggest factor, is stormwater retention. Claremont County is pretty stringent on stormwater retention and what we would need to do with that. You know, you look at Boyd and Seipelt, you look at the high school. We've got a lot of stormwater retention ponds that are there to hold stormwater and slow the flow from going downstream. As John said, we've also got 2 other independent estimates that we did back in 2019. It's difficult. It is difficult to budget this because there's not a design for it. You know, but again, looking at 3 different experts who have kind of looked at our site and looked at where we're at and coming up with, you know, we've got 1 at 5, 1 at 7, another at 6. I think we're kind of, you know, right in the middle of everything of where we think that'll be.
And you see part of the problem with it. When you look at that chart, we've got 42 million and all the way down to 9 cents. We've got 300 and some thousand down to 35 cents. The one number sticks out from the rest of the numbers. And that's, I understand it's hard to come up with a number, but if we
Part of
can-
the reason it's hard to come up with a number, you know, I think OFCC, what did Joe tell us? They've built almost 1,100 schools, plus or minus 1,100 schools. 1,200 schools, something like that in the state of Ohio. So you develop a history and a cost set of what's your average per square foot cost. The problem with your site safety, your site circulation, your stormwater is that every site is different. So it's hard to come up with, it's not really a square foot number. You know, it's not a cost per acre. You know, how close are you to the road? How much, you know, land do you have? Can you just dig a hole to create your, I don't want to oversimplify it, but dig a hole to create your stormwater retention, or do you need to bury underground storage tanks in order to hold that water? Every site is different, so it is difficult to come up with that number. And again, I think what we did was went to 3 different people and said, this is, you know, gave them pictures of our site, this is the size of the building, this is what we're thinking of doing, what's your best guess at what this number will be? And we kind of landed in the middle of the 3 of them. And that's why it's a round number, because it's not X number of square feet times 274.4 to come up with a number. It is kind of an average of 3 opinions that we've received.
And they're specific estimates. I mean, I have those.
Yeah, we
the
have
2.
those from 18 months ago or so, 19
Yeah.
months ago, 20 months ago, however they are. And they are specific. They're down to a dollar figure.
Yeah, dollar
But they also were very different. And it was hard to, from what I remember, it was sort of some apples and oranges.
It is. They,
comparison.
you know, each company that did the estimate made their own assumptions, and their assumptions based on their experience was a little bit different. You know, the direction that I gave them when I asked for those estimates was the exact same. They made assumptions based on their experience that was a little bit different. You know, in doing what we want to do, you know, we talked earlier a little bit about the pedestrian traffic and the volume of traffic. You know, the volume of traffic trying to get on and off that campus is only going to increase by adding 6th graders to this building. It's still going to take some time to get off that campus or on that campus. The biggest thing that we want to do, and the biggest concern that I have at that campus, is separating bus traffic from pedestrian traffic from vehicular traffic. That's where the safety concerns come in, where you've got kids crossing through the parking lot, you know, anywhere from 7th grade through 12th grade. You've got buses, you've got parents dropping off, you've got high school kids coming in and parking, and all through that are buses and kids. And that's where you see a potential risk. And the biggest thing that we'll try to do, and if you look at our 6 elementary schools, parents don't come in and with vehicles where the buses are. You know, so the kids are walking to buses that are stopped. There aren't any cars in those parking lots. The kids who are getting picked up or dropped off by their parents are going to a separate parking lot. They're not getting in the middle of the buses, and we want to separate all of that so that it'll increase that safety. You know, do I think we're going to increase the efficiency of how you get on and off campus as well? Yes, but it's still going to take some. I don't want people to have the misunderstanding that all of a sudden you're going to be able to get on and off campus in 5 minutes, you know, at the end of the school day. That's just not going to happen. It's like going to a Reds game or a Bengals game. There's a lot of cars. It's going to take a little bit of time. But if we can get the buses away from the cars and the walkers and the kids, that'll help that a lot.
And as a side note, if you had anything to do with the delay on the 131 bridge project till after our schools were out, thank you. That would have been a disaster.
I didn't on this specific one, but I've cried to ODOT more than once. So there's a couple of Milford grads that work for ODOT that keep us in mind. So I do think that they waited to do that until after school was out.
Some people keep going that way anyway. Keep forgetting the flow.
It should be noted that Jenny does turn left out of here often and then gets down to Side Pelt and goes, oh my God, I have to
You
turn
get all the way
around.
to the bridge and then turn around? Is that what happens?
The first 3 days, and I've gone left almost every day, and I turn around in Harvest Ridge, and I'm close.
There are houses down there that go, here she comes again.
Once they open it up, she'll still be going down Klondike. So.
No, I guess we get that, Chris, I guess we get that it's a round number because we can't, you know, we just pick something out in the middle and we don't even know what it's gonna be until we get it on the ballot, we pass it on the ballot, we do a design, and some kind of preliminary design that says the roads are going here, and this is what it's gonna look like. So it's a swag, and I don't like swags any better than anybody else in this room.
Yeah, but this is typical. I mean, there's contingencies built into this. We know that already. You know, they've done a formula. They've got these spreadsheets. They've made them available to us, and you know, is it going to cost us $42,947,456.09 to build a 7-8 building? No, it's not.
Well, I just hope we ask for the 36 cents in the bond. That's very important.
Well, and you know, keep in mind, you know, there's a lot of past practice, a lot of past experience that comes into building these budgets. There's a lot of experience, a lot of school buildings that have been built that comes to this number. When you start designing and you start bidding and you start doing these projects, we may find out that the site circulation and traffic flow is going to cost $7 million. Well, guess what? That means $1 million has to come from the building. The exact opposite could happen. Maybe we find ways that we can get all that done the right way, and it's only going to cost $4.5 million. Well, now we got another $1.5 million that goes into that building. It's not thrown away. It's not wasted. And within the building, that's the case. You know, those numbers. You know, I can go in and look, and you can see what develops into $44 million. You know, there's X amount of dollars that's budgeted towards HVAC. There's X amount of dollars that's budgeted towards flooring. There's X amount of dollars that's built, you know, going to the roof. Well, maybe that roof's a little more expensive, so something else has to come in a little bit cheaper You know, that's a part of that whole process that you go through during the design phase, and we work with our architect and engineer to develop the priorities of the district, you know, by meeting with all the stakeholders and go, what's most important? Some schools, they may not care what their utility efficiency is. So they might not spend a whole lot of money on their electrical system and HVAC system. You know, what we've done in the past and would do in the future is that is important to us because those are operating costs for many, many years. So we're going to spend money to get high efficiency systems that are going to lower our utility costs. We're spending more money there. You know, some money comes away from some other areas. That's just the give and take of working within that budget and developing those priorities for what we want this building to look like.
Have we generated any other questions on this slide? Okay, let's go to the next slide. We're almost finished. From my standpoint, it's time. It's time for a Milford Middle School. I'm hoping that the board will take that into consideration. I think it's important for everyone that's here, that's listening or watching on ICRC, is that the district has been great stewards. We have listened and we have incorporated what the community has told us. The community told us that they wanted a middle school only. They did not want any high school renovations, et cetera. They told us that they wanted the length of the bond not to be 37 years. You all will have to decide that, if it will be less. We were told to get state funding, and we are 99.9% sure that that's going to happen, so we'll know in July. Nothing will be put on the ballot until we know that answer. No athletics was to be a part of the bond issue, so we do not have any athletics on this bond issue, and also no auditorium. So we have stripped this down to just a middle school, 6 through 8, with some site safety, traffic flow, and so it is time. Most importantly, I think another thing that we need to do is to commend Brian Rabe, our treasurer, and his team, as he has worked with us to be good stewards of the taxpayers' dollars. The last time the school district was on the ballot was 2013. That levy was supposed to last 3 years. We're going on 8 years now, and potentially 2 more. And so you know, we have been committed to making reductions, absorbing things as best we can. We've worked closely with Mr. Rabe this year, going into next year with our budgeting process, making sure that we are putting in actual numbers for our quotes for things for each department's budget. There's no extra money, so we are you know, cutting the fat, if you will. So we commend Brian. Also, I think what's important to note, as everyone can read up there, the Ohio Auditor of the State awards Excellence in Financial Reporting 5 years in a row to Milford. We're the only district in Claremont County to receive this award 5 years in a row. So I think that is something that Brian, and his team should be commended upon. So thank you, Brian. You know, we've also received a bond rating of AA2 by Moody's. And you know, again, we have great credit, our credit worthiness, if you will, and due to this, we have been able to refinance bonds to lower percentage rates, resulting in taxpayer savings. So again, thank you to Brian for that. Again, we will partner. We'll be partners with OFCC with this $11.5 million. They'll be at the table. They'll have a say. You know, there's good and there's bad with that, as Jeff would say. You know, it comes with some things that they're going to tell us to do that maybe we don't want to do, but we'll have to. We're partners with them. And again, the OFCC recommends us to replace the junior high. They use a scale of 0 to 100, 100 being the worst. The junior high is a 98. A 98. So it's time to replace the junior high. It has exceeded its life expectancy. And you know, the last bullet, we mentioned a little bit earlier, Mrs. Brady, as you had mentioned, that you know, we need this. We need a learning environment that is safe and innovative and prepares our students for their future, the future of a world economy, a world market, competing with students from around the world, not just here in the United States, not just in Ohio, not just in Milford, Ohio. You know, a building can encourage and support and inspire change. It can help us with thoughtful innovation and professional development that is essential for change. And, you know, our learning environments need to help us also anticipate the change in the future. And some of those flexible spaces that Paul described earlier could lead us to that. So it's time. And any questions or comments before the final slide?
I want to add one more thing to the work that this board, the previous board, and what Brian's done is, that doesn't get highlighted enough, is our balance sheet. Our cash on hand, and the health of our balance sheet compared to other districts in the area is significant. It's also allowed us to, I think over 3 fiscal years, invest that cash, and based on the investments and the interest income, to basically earn over about $1 million, or a little over $1 million during that period of time. That's also very impressive, and has allowed us to do things that we may not be able to do, and other districts probably haven't had the opportunity to do. So,
I was just going to echo what you said in terms of the timing of it. I think that I'm not sure exactly how many years that it's been now that we've been talking about the need to replace this building. And when you look at the number of students in it, when I first came here, I was teaching in that building. I think we had about 700 students at that time in the building. I think you had a figure of six something up there. But I think about 700 students in the building, and it wasn't really spacious at that time. So it's only, it's not difficult to imagine how crowded it is now with the 1,000+ students that we have in there. So as far as need is concerned, we're probably past the time that it was time to replace the building. I've had people tell me that because of the COVID and because of the economy at this point in time, it's not the right time this year. But I tried to make the point at that time, and I think one of the most important points to consider is the fact that we're being offered, presumably, we won't know for sure till next month, but offered presumably about $11.5 million toward the cost of this building. And it becomes a matter of people in the community deciding, do we want to take their $11.5 million, or do we want to postpone it again and have both building costs go up and lose the $11.5 million that comes from the state? So that becomes a no-brainer as far as I'm concerned at that point.
Thank you. Yes, sir.
And if that goes by the board, we're going to be waiting to into the 30s, it would be my guess, before we get
It'll be
state funding come
10
around
years. It'll be 10 years before we could probably get something back on.
yeah, this is a 13-month window that OFCC's given us before we fall back into what they call a lapse district. And really, if we decide to go down this path and it does not work, you're probably looking at the 30s, because that's when 2 of
We have
our
some-
other bonds come off.
Correct.
In 2030 and 2036. I think 2030 might be, I know
It's
30,
the 4-pack, isn't it?
is
Yeah,
the 30 is a four-pack, okay.
Yeah, I'd like to echo what you said. Brian, your department and you have done a fantastic job, and we really appreciate all your hard work. Sorry, I want to go back to the number for a minute, though.
Yes.
So this says 55.8, so.
Oh, yes.
Slide 9.
Yeah, I mentioned that too. It says $55,801,543.36. And so I
Right.
said, if the board would pass a resolution for 55 million, let's say tomorrow, and we would have to find a way to get under we would have to eliminate $800,000 somehow.
So going into this, the intent is to, because I looked at the resolution for tomorrow, and it does say 55.
It does.
And so that's the max, right? If we pass
Yes.
that tomorrow, that's the max. So we're going into this assuming we have to find almost $1 million already?
I mean, I'm looking at Jeff. I mean, we're going to have to eliminate some square footage, et cetera, if you will, to get to that 55 million. I don't think we want to go above 55 million.
Well, why? What's magic about 55 million?
I don't know that there is anything magic about it. Anybody? There's nothing magic. I think it's just a number that becomes palatable for our residents.
Yeah, at the end of the day, we as a board need to decide what that number is going to be. I think the recommendation was 55. Is that what I'm hearing on tomorrow's agenda?
Yeah, based on previous conversations, everything we've laid out was always between 50 and 55, so that's why we use that 55 number as that max number. But obviously, you guys can change that at any time between now and you passing that resolution, that max number
Which would be tomorrow.
tomorrow.
Yeah, I'm just wondering, if we can still change that number, but we can't move it up,
Right.
why don't we say 60 million for tomorrow? And then we can determine the specifics of that over the next few weeks.
That's not an issue. That's,
My only issue is that somebody's going to see 60 million and assume that the project is $60 million, at least for the next several weeks until we can make that change. I understand we want to leave ourselves with a little bit of room, but I don't think anything's going to change over the next month to have us increase this by 5. So if we want to do 56, I think that's understandable. It gets us closer to what I believe is nearly 50% of what we went to voters with in 19. A little bit higher than 50%, and again, focusing entirely on this building and nothing else. So
That's fair, 56.
Okay.
I know there are a lot of variables up there, and a lot of things are going to be up or down from those numbers, but when you look at that chart that's prepared there at 55.8, it certainly seems to me that starting out, in a sense, $800,000 in the hole is not a good idea, and I think that making it 56, the difference in the bond issue at that point would be extremely minimal over 30 years.
And that covers the 36 cents, so, you know.
Yeah, I'll chip in the 34 cents if we need to.
then I'll adjust that resolution and we'll repost it to the agenda.
Can we go to the final slide, please? One more. Thank you. So if you do have additional questions or you want to provide us some feedback, there are some opportunities for you to do so. For those of you that are watching online or at home right now or here in the audience, we do have a board meeting tomorrow at 6 p.m. here in this boardroom. Also, we are going to have an Ask Me Anything segment sponsored by the Milford, Ohio Neighborhood Facebook group. That will be, I'm going to use the right word, moderated, thank you, moderated by Rachel Richardson. We're going to do that Wednesday, June 23rd, from noon to 2. So I will be here in my office, presumably with the team, and we'll answer.
Bit of a dangerous title, don't you think?
Dangerous title, Ask Me Anything, yeah. So that's why there's a moderator. So she will moderate to make sure that it is appropriate. And maybe not, but anyway, we'll do that for a couple hours, and we will answer questions on Facebook, sort of almost like our Facebook Live event. You have to become a member of that group in order to ask a question. So if you're not and you would like to be, we'd ask that you do so. And also, again, once again, we're going to have another Facebook Live event on Thursday the 24th from noon to 1. Just like all the others, we'll answer the thought exchange questions first, and then any live questions that come through. You can ask your question through our thought exchange. You can do so by texting the 9-digit code 740-941-776 to the phone number to the number 728-55. You'll get the link, or there is a link there, tejoin.com, and enter the following code 740-941-776. Thought Exchange has been a great partner with us. We love some Thought Exchange, so we'd ask that you participate in that as well. We have 1,200, I think was our number. Is it 1,200 people that watch the actual Facebook Live event at some point? We typically run about 150 to 200 live participants, but certainly over 1,000 views of the video. So we love that. So
Will you highlight anything from the Ask Me Anything in the Facebook Live? Like if there's some good discussion?
Sure.
Just.
We could do that.
Whether it's asked or not, but.
Yeah, absolutely.
Just to carry that forward.
And I believe we, as a district, have a track record of if a question comes up in Facebook somewhere and gets fed up to either the superintendent's level or any of the
I've
people that
been
work
known
for you.
to.
You do a really good job as a team of answering those questions, even though
Thank you.
it's not a forum.
I've been known to get on the Milford, Ohio group, and a couple times I've done it. I just said, listen, I don't normally respond here, but it's appropriate for me to respond here, and then that's it. And I also say that I'm not going to go back and forth with you on Facebook about this issue. And so, yep, just another opportunity for us to be as transparent as we can be. And also, lastly, contact Milford at milfordschools.org is an email that you can email. You can also email me directly. That's fine as well. Those emails go to Wendy, and Wendy and I go through them as needed. That's all for me.
Thank you, Superintendent Spicer. We'll have an opportunity as board to have some further discussion on some of this in item D in our concluding items. Before we move into item C, which is procedure for public commentary, I'm going to ask we take a 3-minute break. Is that okay? Thanks.
Bio break, yes. Appreciate it.
is over with. We're going to move on to item number C on our agenda for this evening, which is procedure for public commentary. Anyone signed up to speak?
No.
Would anyone like to speak? Lisa wants to speak. Oh, okay. We'll wait for Lisa. Somebody else want to speak while we're waiting for Lisa?
Let's all look at her when she comes back.
Just direct us straight to the podium.
Can I just ask a question from here without going up there? Do I have to
No.
Good try.
Do I have to do the name and address thing?
Yep.
Did you
All right.
move?
Huh?
Did you move?
No. Ryan Smith, 5762 Mount Vernon. You mentioned bonds coming off in 2030 and 2036.
Correct.
So, I don't expect you to have this information now, but is that something that you will have available of like what, will that be a reduction in taxpayer
Yeah.
costs when those come off? And can we have some kind of estimate about, what the benefit of that will be?
Yeah, right now, and I'm probably going to get them mixed up, but one of them is 2.5 mils, and I believe the other one's 2.05 mils. As far as which one's which,
Yeah.
off the top of my head, I don't know.
All right.
And as an estimate, this one, as it sits right now, would be about 2.8.
Okay.
2.85? Or lower than that, sorry.
It's probably somewhere around 2.5 at the high end.
So within 10 to 12 years, you have the equivalent or higher coming off the books?
You have 4+ mils coming off.
Yeah, 4+ mils.
Right.
Where we have, this will be around 2.5.
Okay, all right.
Correct. This is only bond.
Don't complicate my question, Morris.
And the big difference in terms of the bond versus a levy is that when you do a levy, generally the funds are capped. So in terms of how much money you make, drops. It's a declining number on that operating levy. With the bond, it's a fixed schedule for the most part.
So,
Fair
but
statement.
for bonds only, we're asking in the 2.5-ish range right now. And then in 2030, 2 something coming off, and in 2036, another 2 something coming off.
Correct.
Okay,
Correct.
all right.
And Brian, do you have the amount per 100,000 estimate?
If we did, at 2.5, it would be, give me a second. It's $35 for every mil, so 2.5.
So if
Take
you
my
were,
calculator
depends
out.
on the percent, I've got it all right here.
35, $87.50.
Per
would be it,
year
Per
for-
$100,000 per year on a,
So around $87, $88 per 100,000.
correct.
Yep.
And one thing I didn't see in here is we had talked about in the past about the length of the bond,
Correct.
and we're looking at 30 years.
Correct. The max you could go out by law, by state law, was 37. And given the last bond issue, the comment was it was too long, we didn't want anything out 37. So we projected all those millages out from 30 to 37, but I think the idea was we would be somewhere in that 30-year range.
And we have, so we could make the cost per 100,000 less than $87, $88 if we went out 37 years, but
Absolutely.
we're gonna look at 30 years, and that'll be the number.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah, the longer length of time would actually drive down the millage.
And we are being helped a little bit by interest rates at this point.
Absolutely.
And also helped a little bit by property values being higher than where they were in
Correct.
19. Those two factors are having an impact on bringing that cost down.
Correct. Discussions with underwriter and municipal, I think originally when we did the presentation last month, we were using a 4% interest. They are telling us conservatively a 3.5 interest rate. And the idea is when we go through it and we start the millage, we use the 3.5 interest rates, but that's obviously not set in stone. You don't know what that actual interest rate is until you actually get them on the open market and sell them. So obviously, 3.5 is where they're thinking that would be the top end. We would fall somewhere a little bit lower. Obviously, lower interest rate is less in the overall picture for the taxpayers.
And I'm going off of memory again, I think we used 5 or 5.5.
And back in
In 19?
we did use 5.
Okay.
And
So
when,
yes, interest
when will
rates
we
have
actually
definitely
sell
dropped.
January-ish? If it were to pass in November, they actually get sold early?
Yeah, you would probably be looking somewhere between January and March, fairly quickly.
And Brian, do they all get sold at once, or do they get sold as the project
No,
proceeds?
they all get sold at once. What happens, it goes on the open market. Now, it's not one bond for 30 years at X number of dollars. It's staggered, like some of them will be due in 5 years, some of them will be due in 10 years. It's kind of planned out. But once they go on the open market, that's the underwriter's job, is to get them sold, because if they don't sell them that day on the open market, the underwriter's responsible for buying them. So regardless, whatever day we go to sell, they will be sold.
Sorry, Lisa, I had called you up earlier, but we went off on a tangent like we usually do, so please.
No worries. Do I have to introduce myself? My name is Lisa McKinney. I live here in the district. Okay, so looking at the 55,801 number, and then you guys are talking about just capping it at 55 million tomorrow, like capping that as like the magic number. I just want to remind you, I participated in the community advisory team after the bond failed previously. And when we presented our recommendations to you, the overwhelming winner for recommendations was just a new junior high, grades 6 to 8, integrating the preschool and site safety, which is what we're talking about now. And we actually had that estimated for 2020 cost at 64.4 million. And the other thing that we kind of figured out through all of the surveying and polling and everything was, whatever you do, don't go over 72 million. We're obviously nowhere near 72 million. So I just wanted to speak and say that I think it would be better, since you can change the number, you know, you're capping it tomorrow. We won't go above this. I say push that up, like to the 60 that you mentioned, Mrs. Brady, because when we're looking, you know, at like $1 million difference, you know, if we go under, that's great, but we were kind of expecting $60 million. So I would hate to see us lowball it and then have to try to make up things if that were to come to pass. Or eliminate square footage or something that we need because we started so low. I mean, 55 million would be wonderful, don't get me wrong, but
So,
Well, you've got to consider into the fact that when we were talking about that number, we weren't talking about state money.
correct.
We were talking about the top figure, and the figure that we have here, and I see Jeff coming this way, and he's probably going to say this, is the figure that we're looking at is 67 million.
Okay,
Before you drop the 11.5 million off.
I gotcha,
So that's what gets us down into the 55.8.
I gotcha.
So, and that was also, I also served on that committee with you, as did Emily, and the big thing was get the state money.
Correct.
And that was the overwhelming loudest thing that we heard, other than just do the junior high, because that's what we need.
Right, I
So-
understand that, and trust me, I greatly appreciate keeping it as low as possible, but I also think that you could go up a little bit and it still be acceptable.
yeah, no, so I appreciate that. The only issue is that we're talking about, today is the 16th, and between now and July 15th, I think, when we actually will decide whether to vote on this, there is nothing that's going to drastically change in these numbers. They're going to be the same. We have to use 27440. We've got a really good feel for what our square footage is, and so it's not like we're going to cap ourselves when we get into the construction side of it and be like, oh, we capped ourselves at 56 million. This is just a decision on what we're going to go to the voters with if we decide to go that route. So
For
that,
the-
and that won't, these numbers won't change in the next month.
Right.
I mean, there's
right.
nothing that can change them, I don't think, but,
So-
so it could be 55.8. Will it be 60? I don't think it will, because I don't know what could change in the numbers in the next month.
Right, I was just thinking in terms of, we promised not to ask above this, right? Was that
Correct.
not the discussion? So I think that you do have a little bit more you could go there without it being,
It's procedural that we have to file with the, not to exceed, with the state or the county.
High Department of Taxation,
So the, not to exceed with, as a procedural move, and it's got to be done by a certain deadline. So that's why we're voting on that tomorrow.
Right.
And then from there, we've got to determine whether or not we want to take this project at all forward, which we'll do on a conditional basis if we approve that on the 15th of July. And then, of course, we'll wait till we talked earlier about the NOCA and the other stuff.
right.
But I don't think that number's going to change from now to then.
I gotcha.
So even if down the road after we decide to move it forward and we suddenly realize that steel prices have doubled or tripled above what they are right now, even though we know they've run up now, we're too bad. We've got the number we got.
Right, I gotcha.
Yeah, it is interesting, though, thanks for sharing that, Lisa, because if, and I don't know what other people think, but, maybe we do need to add in a little bit right now, so that we have that cushion. And I don't know what happens, like, if we were to go for 58, and it came in at 54, could we pay that 4 million off sooner?
No.
No, so we would,
No, the money that you raise by, if you went out for 58 and you did the bonds for 58, all 58 has to go into this project.
But then-
You couldn't take any part of it to pay off the bonds early.
okay, so in 3 or 4 years, when the project is done, you can't put more against it like a mortgage or
No,
anything?
no.
Okay,
All the monies have to be done in the project,
okay.
spent in the project.
Oh, okay, so what if we went for 55.8 and we came in lower, we would have to spend the money in?
You would have to spend it.
Yeah.
And that's where you
Within
get into certain items, you got good, better, and best, and you're shooting for good, and then you got the extra money, so you
Yeah,
install
okay,
best.
and that's how we ended up with the 4-pack, not the 4-pack, the 4 rooms. Okay,
Got it?
I got it, yeah.
So did I maybe misunderstand about the number you're deciding on tomorrow? Like, I thought it was a number that was saying, like, we won't ask for more than this, but
You
you
were
could,
right.
but you could ask for less than that. That's how I understood it. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Yes.
That's correct.
Okay.
So, yeah, we could say 100 million.
Well, right,
Yeah,
I know,
and-
but I mean,
And
but I
then
was
put it on the
just.
ballot at 50 if we
Right,
wanted to.
right.
So that was my concern, was just if you put your cap at 55, but then there's no cushion if you need 1 or 2 more million, but you could say 60 tomorrow, but ask for the actual bond to be less than that, right?
Yes.
If it came out like, oh, instead we're gonna do 57 or 56 or,
Yeah,
that,
I-
that's what I
We're gonna
was.
ask for 56 tomorrow, right? We're gonna
That's
ask for
At
56?
least 56.
Yeah.
And what she's saying, why not give it a little bit more room? I think my issue is that I don't think the number's going to change in the next month because we're sort of locked in with OFCC as our partner. And that sometimes people will see 60 million and they won't let that leave their mind.
Well, right,
They'll
right.
say they're doing a project for 60 million and for whatever reason, 55 million sounds a lot better than 60. And
Right.
so I'm a little bit concerned about that, knowing that I don't think the number's going to change. And we really, and by the way, appreciate all the work you guys did on CAT. That was fantastic feedback. I was going back through those in the last couple of weeks and the numbers. I was super excited that we're going to be under those numbers
Yes.
a little bit, which is
Yeah, that
great
was
2
great
years-
for
2
me
years
looking
later.
back through it too. I
Yeah.
was like, oh, cool, we're not anywhere near like 72 million or whatever, so that was great. But my worry is that historically, it seems like Milford has had to pick up the tab on their bonds because the square footage wasn't there, or something came up, and we have had to eat $1 million or $2 million, and is there a way to possibly avoid that, I guess, is what I'm.
There's not, because you have to make your best guess. We could pad the number, but then we can't go back. I mean, I really wanted, and I think most of our board wanted this process to be a very data-driven process. We want a justification for every dollar and every number that we're putting out there, and we want to keep it as low as possible. And so by doing that, you take a risk. We pick the square foot. We know what this cost per square foot is. It's determined by the OFCC, and we're going to have to build a building with what we got.
Right.
But we're not going to know, we start building this thing 2.5 years from now, if this is where we go.
Right, and
Have any idea what material costs are, labor costs? We don't know any of that. So it is a bit of a chance, but you build to what you have.
That's what made me nervous when you were saying 55 million tomorrow, but already your number was 55.8. You know what I mean? And I was just kind of like, well, when the CAT team came back with community feedback saying that they would support a little bit more, then why not do 57 or 58 instead of 55? That's all I was kind of getting at. So, thank you.
It's common sense, and it makes sense, but there's a fine balance we have here with making sure that we do everything we possibly can to keep this cost as low as possible, because this is our only shot for a long time to get this thing built. And so, do you take a risk by trying to keep this cost as low as possible? I think you do.
I know.
But I think it's worth the risk.
And if the cash is there, I guess, to buffer something that would come up, then I guess it's not that big of a deal, but.
Well, we'll trim out the gold and the mahogany out of it to get it down to a more reasonable cost when we get down to the end.
I'm just saying, looking at site help, for example, Mrs. House was
Well-
very honest with the CAT team that we had to put cash into that building, and
Both of
they
the buildings,
still
right?
lost square footage, and,
Well, but the goal when we did those two buildings was to be cost neutral, right?
No bond.
No bond at all.
Those were freebies, so they had to work backwards from that amount of credits that were received, from that amount of dollars to build those two schools. And
Right.
so, I think that maybe a stairwell was added.
But then it has us in this position now where we need to have a 6 to 8 middle school because we have to
Yeah.
find room. So I'm just saying, it's all
We-
kind of,
Yeah, and to be clear, even if we had not had to cut those corners on Sipelt and Boyd, we would still need the middle school. It's more than just that.
oh, no, obviously, no,
Yeah.
obviously.
Yeah, it's all of the buildings at this point, most of the buildings.
But also at the big picture, it was just kind of like, I'm scared of the squeeze, I guess,
I'm scared of getting this passed if we go down this route. That's what I'm scared of.
I
And,
understand.
and
my-
we're,
that's my biggest
everybody that's sitting down this row here are, our responsibility is to the taxpayer to try to be as cost-efficient as we can and be good stewards of their funds. And that's, the difference between 55 million and 55.8 million, I look at that 0.8 million and I say, and you gotta look at the team and say, hey, how do we figure out how to thrift out 0.8 million? It's
I know.
1.6%, I think. You can do that. Now, you can't take 20% out, but you can take 1% out. So take a little task on yourself and do it.
Right.
And not put the burden back on the taxpayer and then round it up to 56 or 57 just to make sure. I don't think that's what we were hired to do. I don't think that's what I was hired to do anyway.
I understand. It's an interesting time right now.
You step out on the ledge
We're
and you
still
do
a
your
couple
best.
years away from starting, so.
For us, it's always a balance between what all of our stakeholders need and want, and trying to understand our community, trying to understand what we know that we need a new building, because it's not that we need a new building because it's a building, it's because of what occurs inside the building. It's because we know that we're restricting our students from being able to do some of the things that other students have the opportunity to do. So it's affecting education, and it's becoming costly to maintain, and it's just something we're going to make a decision on.
I understand.
Thank
Thank you.
And if we think about maintenance, just to kind of piggyback off that, if this doesn't work, we have 10 years of maintenance. You know what I mean? The next opportunity were to come, that's flushing money down the toilet, literally, you know, if there is. So I do think it's a very fine balance of what is best and needed for our staff and our students, and what is responsible for the community.
Agreed, agreed.
Brian, if whatever we take out on the bond has to be used on facilities, but it doesn't have to be used on this building, correct?
No.
Yes, it would, because the way the bond language is written, it's specifically, in the bond language, you have to, in the
So-
resolutions that you pass, you have to specifically say, I'm using it for these items.
So why were we able to take the 1.3 million and build the 4 rooms?
My guess is you probably said all facilities versus just, it's all how the language was written, the resolution was written at the time. So it probably said something about to do the master plan or something to that extent.
So shouldn't we be writing this like that as well, just to protect ourselves, no matter what number we come up with?
It's dangerous,
Why?
because we're telling the public, we want you to vote to build this middle school. We desperately need it. But oh, by the way, just in case we want to roll that into a pet project, we can do that.
Yeah, but, I mean, let's say construction costs
I mean,
fall.
I know where you're coming from, but
Yeah.
I think that some will look at it like that.
Okay.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not on the ballot like that, right? It's in the resolution, but
No, it goes on the ballot as well.
Specifically like that?
Yeah, if you remember, in 19, in that resolution and on the ballot, it mentioned the new middle school, athletic facilities and stuff, and
Right.
those types of things. Obviously, this one strictly says, the middle school, site circulation, and the demo of, Miami Elementary and, demolition of the junior high. So all the money would have to be used for those projects.
Well, and I'm with you, Andrew. If we can become more efficient in this building process and be able to utilize that to spend towards high school roofing or HVAC or something like that,
whatever,
it would be
yeah.
great. But I think this has simply got to be a standalone. This is what we're paying for. This is what you're paying for, and
Very
and
focused.
not try and muddy it.
And that's,
So it's not this,
What happened in 2009 with the high school, very unusual. Just the market conditions and construction at that time, just like the general contractor in the high school, they did that job so low, within a couple of years, that job being over, they were out of business. So the chances of that happening again, I think are pretty slim, and I wouldn't worry too much about it.
Do we have any other public comments? Anyone like to speak? Hearing none, we'll move on to item D, our concluding items. The next regular board meeting will be right here tomorrow night at 1099 State Route 131, Milford, Ohio, at 6 p.m. Just to reiterate. Is there any discussion amongst our board? We've had a bit tonight. It's good.
yeah. I know, I keep coming back to this, but, you know, Dave, you said a few minutes ago, you can cut out 800,000. But that's assuming that those numbers are good in 2 or 3 years when it comes time. If we are going into this already needing to cut $1 million or $2 million, and then the 800,000 is on top, then you're really in trouble. And, I mean, it was, the Seipelt Boyd project, we sat there with this list, and it was like, okay, you know, can we cut this for a couple $1,000s? Can we cut that? It was kind of unbelievable, and maybe it's not for people who are in the industry, but, you know, it was a difficult, and it was a really stressful thing as you're deciding what's gonna be in and not in this building. So I just really wanna make sure, you know, like Lisa was saying, that we are protected, and that, like Jeff said, if this number really is looking out at the best guess of what things are going to be in a couple years, great. But if those are good numbers for today, I worry.
274. 40 is, it was tight already.
Yes.
It was tight already.
Yes.
The
So-
other thing that we don't know is we don't know what the bond rate is gonna be. We may get a better than 3.5 bond rate, and then once again, we're gonna have more money, correct, Brian?
Correct.
And then we're gonna have to find a way to do that, so.
You
It could
wouldn't
go
have-
either way.
No, we don't get
Yeah,
more.
no, you wouldn't have any additional money to spend on the building. The savings would be passed down to the taxpayers.
The taxpayers would see a smaller bill.
Right.
We'll still get the same dollar.
Brian, do you happen to know, you talked about refinancing the previous bonds. Do you know how much was saved on that? Is there any way to know before it's finalized?
Off the top of my head, I don't, because that was done
What we were able to-
07?
Yeah, what we were able to do is when we passed the bond to add on to the high school, they refinanced at that time, taxes did not go up.
Okay, so that's what you're talking about. Okay. So it wasn't necessarily a lower interest rate, it was just using that money.
Well, it was a lower interest rate, but the net, at the end of the day, meant that taxes did go up in order to pay for the bonds that added on to the high school.
Okay, thanks.
So two issues. Do you want us to increase the not to exceed number right now to allow us time to consider that we add to the bond as a contingency?
I do, yeah,
What would you like to get to? 58?
59.
Let's do 59.
Okay.
Thank you.
Are we okay with
The re-
59?
The reason I was hesitant, if you go, there's two limits in the law, there's a 4% and a 9%. If you want 60, it's a whole different resolution that we have to pass.
What?
If you, as long as you stay, the debt limit that we have to ask the state for.
Oh, okay.
The resolution is we're going to go over the 4. If you went over 60, it's a resolution that we'd have to go over the 9%. So it'd be a completely different resolution. So if you're going to go up, don't go above 6. Don't make it 59 or less. Therefore, we don't have to do a segment resolution.
She suggested 59, so she knew all that beforehand.
Got it.
She already versed on all that.
And
So-
understand everything you said, of course.
So let's make it clear, we
Clear,
will.
don't go over 60.
We want to do a resolution tomorrow that, not to exceed 59 million, but
Okay.
that is not our final number. We'll have an opportunity to talk and discuss whether or not, when we decide on that number, what that number is, but as, right now, the recommendation is 55.8.
8.
And so not 59, but it gives us a little bit of breathing room to have this discussion further.
Right.
Okay.
And that final decision would be, you would need to make on July 8th or 9th.
Okay?
July 8th or 9th,
Which
And-
is not
And
very
then we
far
will
away.
vote on it the 15th.
okay. No, but it's not
Yes.
tomorrow.
No.
So, July 8th or 9th,
It's a Thursday or Friday. Right.
oh, that's the special meeting to determine the exact dollar amount.
and there-
And we will determine
Okay.
the meeting date, time tomorrow evening for that meeting.
Correct. That is on the board
I don't
agenda
have that in my
for tomorrow
calendar
evening.
yet. Okay. We'll just find out tomorrow.
Just block up both days.
July, all of
It's a
July.
holiday week, it's a holiday week. Any more discussion from our board? Hearing none, I'll ask for a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Roll call, please.
Mrs. Brady?
Yes.
Mrs. Chestnut?
Yes.
Mr. Miranda?
Yes.
Mr. Yaki?
Yes.
Mr. Ham?
Yes, thank you. And thank you for coming tonight. And
We
watching.
were scheduled to be out of here
I
at
have a
8
new
o'clock.
favorite
It's
joke.
8:01.
My